And if you're not paying attention to what's happening with the customer's account, you'll see a reduction in cash. How are you going about collecting from your customers? One of the elements that has come back time and time and time again from customer consultancies is that they do not have a discipline. Look at your accounts, start to communicate, understand what's going on, set a strategy for your supervisor, your manager, your financial manager, and actively pursue the best possible asset quality you can have.
In this edition, we're going to cover insolvency and bankruptcy, and there's no one better qualified than my friend and colleague, Professor Patrick O'Connelly. Patrick is one of the world's most respected credit practitioners. Good afternoon, Patrick.
Good afternoon, Mark. Nice to be with you.
And you as well. So to kick off then, this is probably an obvious question, but why would you say this is an appropriate moment to introduce the topic of insolvency and bankruptcy?
Well, as we are in the middle of a global economic crisis, the backlash of impact on reduced trade, problematic repayment patterns, increased risk, problematic supply chains, make it an absolute requirement for credit and risk professionals to look at the assets, maintain a discipline, and more effectively communicate with the sources of their cash flows.
Okay. Many business associates think that insolvency and bankruptcy are synonymous. Would you agree? Is there a similarity for credit risk associate purposes?
Interestingly enough, technical insolvency is fairly straightforward. The point at which one of your debtors, one of your customers, is unable to meet undisputed payments as they fall due, they are technically insolvent. Now, many customers, particularly the smaller ones, won't ever know this until they fail outright. But insolvency generally is represented by that definition. Some countries have titled the programs associated with identifying and restructuring businesses or working with clients in a more defined, informed way, identify their solutions as being in an insolvency act. So in that respect, insolvency in that case would mean a restructuring, a forgiveness of debt, a liquidation, an adjustment to the existing relationship you have with them in an official way under the edicts and the points required by your country to complete an agreement under an insolvency act. Central and Eastern Europe, many of the countries have insolvency acts. They're included in their civil code. The bankruptcy occurs once the debtor, who is under pressure of payment from creditors, from you, has determined it is impossible for them to continue as a business because not only are sales declining because credit lines are closing, but they can no longer make payments consistent with their obligations. They will file an application for recognition as a bankrupt. They will submit it usually to the Secretary of State or the designated district office, and it will be reviewed. If it is approved at the date and time that the bankrupt petition is approved, your customer is deemed bankrupt. That means at that point, if your normal process is to charge them against the reserve for bad debt, that's the point at which you would do that. But the difference between the two, the Bankruptcy Act in many countries operates under its own structure. In many countries, it's part of the commercial code. and in many countries, it's part of the civil code. Depending on where you are and where your client is, it would be good for you to understand those particular aspects so you know what plan you need to put in place.
Is this what in the US is referred to as Chapter 11? Is that part of the process?
In the United States, the bankruptcy code is its own entity, and its various chapters deal with aspects of bankrupt sources. So, a city filing for bankruptcy files for a Chapter 12. Both a consumer and a commercial entity can file for a protection under Chapter 9, which is a liquidation. And mostly commercial enterprises also have the opportunity to reorganize under Chapter 11. Many of the credit people that read articles on the subjects of risk and failure will be very familiar with those chapters.
Yeah, I tend to associate Chapter 11 with airlines a lot. You hear a lot about that, and I guess with the way the world is at the moment, we'll be hearing a lot more of it as time goes forward.
I think that's the case. More consolidation.
For sure. What indicators are readily available to recognize both conditions?
Well, the most basic indicator of risk of failure or increasing risk at the customer level is found right in the age trial balance. If a credit associate is responsible for a population of customers, in other words, their portfolio of customers, as it comes out on a regular basis, structured high to low in terms of outstanding, of past due, of extreme past due, it's a mechanism that they can use to step-by-step check to see if a continued erosion is occurring. And in the case of a bankruptcy, when you're talking about a customer's identifying for you when they're growing problematically and they're approaching bankruptcy, in order to be successful in a reorganization, the bankrupt will require cash and he'll require product. And if you're not paying attention to what's happening with the customer's account, you'll see a reduction in cash or not. You'll see a reduction, an increase in sales demand or not if you're not paying attention. But the combination of the two, the reduction in cash to you, the increase in sales from you, will give them the resources they need to survive a reorganization to your detriment. So stay on the trial balance. This is a perfect time to enhance customer communication. Where you see something that's a little sketchy, make the phone call, and you can introduce it as an attempt on your part to make sure that the customer is getting all the assistance they need in order to weather this trying period. And at the same time, you'll better understand where the customer's cash condition is, what its intent is, and just generally speaking, develop a better relationship with that customer within the crisis, which will make you more successful as we begin to move away from this problematic period.
I think that's a great point. And I think right now, one of the things I always talk about in our training sessions is that a quick increase in sales is not always a good thing. And a good credit controller or a good credit person will look at that from two ways. One, it's good, but on the other hand, it could be that a company is trying to trade themselves out of trouble. So the sales guys will be happy. And then, so once a negative trend is identified and there is this pressure to release orders and satisfy the customer and indeed the salesman and their commissions, how can we as credit people reduce the risk and still sell?
Yes, it's significantly more expensive to bring a new customer online than it is to manage properly your existing base.
What options do I have if I've just been notified that one of my customers is now bankrupt or is struggling?
Yeah, there's an entirely different approach to both questions. Let's take the one. Let's start with struggling. A customer that's having a problem paying his just debts as they fall due is a customer that you might be able to do something with very readily. And that is, you get on the phone, you find out what they see as impediments. Now, this would be a call made jointly with the salesperson in the organization. The reason being, he's going to want to sell something to that customer. If it's impossible, or he's merely setting the company up to lose the carrying cost of the product as well as the profit, and the salesperson is getting it ready to lose the customer, he needs to know this because he's already structured what his intended selling is for the month, the quarter, going through the year. So he's going to want to know this. But the reality is, once you know that a customer has a problem, that's when you take the role of mentor. Well, how are you going about, this would be posed to the customer, how are you going about collecting from your customers? One of the elements that has come back time and time and time again from customer consultancies is that they do not have a discipline. They do not regularly, periodically call their customer in anticipation of a due date. Shortly after the due date, once you've confirmed the product is delivered and received appropriately. If you don't establish the discipline with the customer's customer, their cash flows will not be available to fund their payments to you. So this is an excellent opportunity for you to do a little mini mentoring and actually show the customer, give them a benefit in the short term that's going to sustain them. They just invoke that discipline with every one of their customers. And it's not the sole solution, but it's one that's very readily available, and it shows return immediately. Their DSO goes down, and as a consequence, you take a priority role amidst their other suppliers because you've given them something of value. They will return the favor, presumably, by perhaps paying you better than they would pay somebody else. In times like this, the fact that you get paid at all is a real benefit. So you see value immediately.
I think so. I'd add to that. I think that one of the plus sides I hope will come out of this situation is that corporates that have been very, shall we say, lax in their disciplines and allowed extended payment terms will realize that wasn't such a smart idea. I've been saying for a long time now that today's overdue is tomorrow's write-off, and tomorrow this is tomorrow, and also the double whammy of the double whammy of that is also that sales guys tend to get paid on invoice and not on payment. So I hope a lot of companies will realize that both of those things were not such a good idea, and that disciplines will ensue, and that the value of the credit team will be appreciated. Okay, well, so is the process of dealing with the default, insolvency, bankruptcy the same for every country? I know we touched on it earlier, but just to recap on that point.
Yeah, the answer to that is clearly, generally speaking, when a bankruptcy is formed, it creates an estate for which a trustee is named to manage the assets and the liabilities inherent in that particular bankrupt debtor. Okay. Now, the mechanisms that are involved, whether there's a receivership initially, whether there is some type of arbitration that is invoked immediately, is different from country to country. So in future podcasts, we will probably take this down to the level that is of interest to our members. If a member comes in and says, I've got a lot of Polish bankruptcies that are coming on board, and I just need to know more, we'll do a podcast on that, and we'll do it with informed, experienced executives who have gone through the process. We talked earlier about recognizing when the bankruptcy occurred and immediately setting it to charge against the reserve for bad debt. That would occur for smaller bankruptcies. For larger bankruptcies, you may even want to recognize it as an impaired receivable, set it off onto a side contingent liability, and join in the creditors committee. If you're one of the top 10 owed by this particular debtor, you would be automatically, generally speaking, named to a creditors committee, and these individuals manage the flow of the relationships with creditors that a reorganizing bankrupt would have. By the way, the individual who has the largest due with that bankrupt becomes the chair of the creditors committee. It's both a bane and a benefit. The benefit is you drive the process. The bane is everybody recognizes that you got stumped for the biggest debt with that particular customer and wonders if you know what you're doing. So just so you recognize how that flows.
I think in a number of cases also it's worth actually considering before you go to any process whether it's actually worth it. I remember from my operational days that there was like a hierarchy of who got what first, and it was normally the receivers, which would be your Grant Thorntons or your Deloitte or your PwC, that would be acting on behalf of the distressed client. Their fees were more or less sacrosanct. So then you had to decide, if you're on a 10% margin, is it actually worth doing it in the first place? €200 debt, 10% margin, it's not worth the effort, is it? So
that is correct. Small debt, you'd probably just post to the bad debt reserve and move on. You make a good point, though, Mark. In bankruptcy, the purpose, the overall purpose of the bankruptcy estate is to assure equitable distribution of the assets as against the debt outstanding. You made the point as well, one to consider. There are preference debt items. The banks that are collateralized will have preferential treatment under bankruptcy. If you have, as we have discussed many times with our students, if you have a guarantee, a properly executed guarantee, you move to a higher priority in your rank as possible participant in the benefice after the preferred accounts. You will go to a preferential list of secured creditors. If that's you, you would certainly enjoy a larger percentage of the available 50 cents that's left for distribution. When you get to the bottom of the list, the 300 creditors that are out there under €100, the potential recovery is between 2% and 0. So your point is well made. Do not waste time where it is inefficient for you to spend any more time. The decision was made, the risk was taken, the risk came back on you, it was failed, so you move on and don't make the same mistake twice. Yeah,
when you think the hierarchy country to country, that does include the actual receivers or the administrators. Taxes very often still, bank court costs, bank mortgages, and so on. There's not going to be a lot left for the mere open credit punters, are there? So okay.
The average number for recovery in North America, and again, it involves Mexico, but doesn't go much further into Latin America. You would be looking at best case 35%. and that's secured. Now, this is, of course, if you have a letter of credit, you have to make this statement. If you have a properly annotated letter of credit in place and you are notified your customer is bankrupt, you grab your documents, you tootle on down to the bank, you present the documents, and your new relationship is between the bank and you. You could care less that there's a bankruptcy in play. So something to consider as an aside to the discussion we're having.
I think it's fair to say at this point that this is quite a complex issue, but it's important that everybody's aware of it, because most associates, whether on sales or on the credit collection side, won't have experienced this on a regular basis. I think as is going to happen. Most of this is actually in our foundation course. We introduce all of this in the foundation.
Indeed.
Yeah, so there's a good introduction to it there. In your experience, Pat, and you and I have been through a few of these recessions in our time. Do you think there's going to be an increase? This is going to go on for a while, and there's going to be an increase, and maybe even with the extra whammy once we get through this, that Brexit will raise its head and create its own complications?
I think that what you've just described is a series of increasingly more complex risks that are going to have to be managed. At the moment, we have not yet begun to experience the pain. It would seem so, but from a business standpoint, we are done with the first quarter. We are into the second quarter. Sales have dried up. Supplier potential for providing raw materials and modules at the front end is killing accounts payable. Inventories, whatever they are, will be running down. So the potential for selling will be reduced. All right. Now, we've often talked in the past when we were talking about our DSO, as sales increase, if your collections increase, your DSO drops tremendously in the short term as you take advantage of this period. You are now into the reverse of that mode. Sales decreasing, your aging deteriorating, your cash flows disappearing. DSOs are going to jump to levels that have been unheard of. So your best, my recommendation to associates, best case, get into your portfolio, immediately begin to look at what aspects of that, if the aging is deteriorating rapidly with a customer, have you initiated conversation with the customer? Do you know if that's going to continue? Does he have the resources to pay you, but on an extended basis across time? That would obviously cause your DSO to go up, but would not cause your bad debt reserve to be impacted on a regular basis, because he's working it out. The potential for future sales is there. I mean, there are many, many things that can be done. Get inside, take a look on a detailed basis at the content of your accounts receivable portfolio for your specific customers. Do you have offsets to debit transactions that are unattached that you can research and attach, reducing the inflation that is occurring within your accounts receivable? So the point is, a reduction in accounts receivable by reason of applying in-house credits against the debit is the same as cash. It has the same effect.
Yeah.
So there are things that can be done, but the communication piece, I cannot stress enough the value of a joint call for the medium and larger customers where there is a significant impact on your base. A joint call with sales to establish your interest, provide what assistance that you can give, but most of all to understand what condition they're in the short term, because all of these that are in reasonable condition today, in next month, and the month after that are going to feel the pain that you're feeling. Their suppliers will have problems getting supplies to you, your customer, which means he's going to have difficulty selling, and that means you're going to have difficulty collecting in an increasingly more difficult way, month 2, month 3. So by the end of the second quarter reporting, it is going to be catastrophic. The market will be in tremendous crisis, again, with opportunities if you're an investor. But if you are a person who is relying on that investment for your retirement, your 401k, the future of your family, you will be in dire straits. So take it right down to the most common level. Look at your accounts, start to communicate, understand what's going on, set a strategy for your supervisor, your manager, your financial manager, and actively pursue the best possible asset quality you can have. It will, in the end, coming out of the second quarter, going into the third quarter, as with fits and starts, the market slowly begins to return. You'll have a base that is stronger than that. It is essentially competitive advantage. It is stronger than your competitors, and you can drive faster and harder because you've done the work you need to do to create a foundation.
Sure, and I think I was thinking also all those students that kind of rolled their eyes when I said have a look at the retention of title clause in your terms and conditions. Maybe now they'll have a look at their terms and conditions.
The time has come, Mark. The time has come.
Well, it's a credit crisis, and that's our job, right? So this is our moment to shine.
That's it.
Sure. Patrick, it's been a real pleasure sharing your knowledge and experience over the last 20 minutes or so. Thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to doing the next session with you over the next week or two. Thanks very much indeed.
The pleasure is mine. Have a good day, Mark.